Hello. My name is Mark, and I never thought I'd be the guy who got cheated on. Emily and I had been married for 10 years, and while things weren't perfect, I thought we were happy. We had a cozy little house, 2 beautiful kids, and a life that felt comfortable, stable. I thought we were a team, partners who had each other's backs no matter what. But as it turned out, I had been wrong. So very wrong. It all started with a feeling. I couldn't put my finger on it, but something about Emily had changed. She had become distant, her laughter forced, her eyes never quite meeting mine. She had started going out more, late nights at work, girls' nights. Random errands that always seemed to take longer than they should. I tried to ignore it, tried to convince myself that I was just being paranoid. But the doubt gnawed at me, a constant weight that I couldn't shake. One night, Emily said she had to work late. It wasn't the first time, and something about the way she said it didn't sit right with me. She avoided eye contact, her voice too casual, and I could feel that something was off. After she left, I sat there in our living room, the silence pressing down on me, and I made a decision. I needed to know the truth. I drove to her office, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, my heart pounding in my chest. I parked a block away, my stomach twisting in knots as I waited, watching the entrance. An hour passed, then 2, and still no sign of her. Just when I was starting to think that maybe I was overreacting, I saw her. She wasn't alone. Emily walked out of the building, her arm wrapped around another man. He was tall, well-dressed, his hand resting comfortably on her waist as they walked to his car. I felt my heart stop, my breath catching in my throat as I watched them. They were smiling, laughing, and it was like a knife twisting in my gut. Couldn't believe it. My wife, the woman I loved, the mother of my children, was cheating on me. I followed them, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. They drove to a hotel, and I watched as they went inside, my heart breaking with every step they took. I wanted to confront her, to demand answers, to make her understand how much she was hurting me. But instead, I just sat there, staring at the entrance, the reality of what was happening crashing down on me. I drove home that night, my mind racing, my heart shattered. I didn't know what to do, didn't know how to process what I had just seen. I wanted to confront her, to demand the truth, but I was terrified of what she might say. I was terrified of losing everything we had built together. Our home, our family, our life. When Emily came home later that night, she was quiet, her eyes avoiding mine as she mumbled something about a long day at work. I looked at her, my heart aching. The image of her with that man burned into my mind. I wanted to yell, to scream, to make her understand how much she had hurt me. But instead, I just nodded, swallowing the pain, the words catching in my throat. The next few days were torture. I tried to act normal, tried to pretend that everything was fine. But the doubt, the betrayal was always there, gnawing at me. I couldn't look at Emily without seeing her with that man, without feeling the weight of her lies pressing down on me. I needed answers, needed to know why she had done it, but I was too scared to ask. One night, after the kids were in bed, I finally gathered the courage to confront her. We were sitting in the living room, the silence between us thick and heavy, and I couldn't take it anymore. I turned to her, my heart pounding, my voice barely above a whisper. "Emily," I said, my voice shaking, "I need to know the truth. Are you seeing someone else?" She looked at me, her eyes wide with surprise, and for a moment, I saw something. Fear, guilt, regret. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it, her eyes filling with tears. "Mark," she began, her voice cracking. I don't know what to say. The air left my lungs, my heart breaking all over again. "Just tell me the truth," I said, my voice barely audible. "Please, Emily, I need to know." She took a deep breath, her tears spilling over as she looked down at her hands. "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I've been seeing someone. I'm so sorry, Mark. I never meant for it to happen, but I don't know." I stared at her, the words hitting me like a punch to the gut. "Why?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Why would you do this? We have a family, a life." Why would you throw it all away? She looked up at me, her eyes filled with regret. I don't know, she whispered. I was feeling lost, disconnected. I felt like we weren't us anymore, and he was just there. He made me feel wanted, made me feel alive. But it was a mistake, Mark. I know it was a mistake, and I'm so sorry. I felt my stomach turn, the pain overwhelming. The woman I had loved, the woman I had trusted with everything, had betrayed me. She had chosen someone else, even if just for a moment. And now, everything we had built together felt like a lie. I stood up, my hands trembling as I tried to steady myself. I need some time, I said, my voice barely audible. I can't do this right now. Emily looked up at me, her eyes wide with fear. Please, Mark, she begged, her voice cracking. Don't leave. I love you. I want to make this right. But I couldn't. Not now. I turned and walked out of the room, the sound of her sobs echoing in my ears as I made my way to the guest room. I sank onto the bed, my head in my hands, the tears finally spilling over. Everything I had believed in, everything I had trusted, was gone. I spent the next few nights in the guest room, the distance between Emily and me growing with every passing day. She tried to talk to me, tried to explain, but I wasn't ready to hear it. I wasn't ready to forgive, wasn't ready to move on. The betrayal was too deep, the hurt too raw. But even as I tried to process everything, there was something that didn't sit right with me. Something about her story, about the way she had acted, felt off. There were moments when I caught her staring at her phone, her face pale, her hands trembling. She seemed scared, almost like she was hiding something more than just the affair. I decided I needed to know the full truth. I couldn't live in the dark any longer, couldn't keep wondering if there was more to the story. So one night, after Emily had gone to bed, I took her phone. I knew it was wrong, knew that I was crossing a line, but I didn't care. I needed answers. What I found was worse than I could have ever imagined. I sat on the edge of the guest room bed, Emily's phone in my hands, my heart pounding as I scrolled through her messages. I felt a mix of anger, fear, and desperation, each emotion clawing at me as I searched for answers. I knew she had cheated, that much she had confessed. But something still felt off, and I needed to understand what else she was hiding from me. The messages between her and the man, Ryan, were there, each one like a dagger to my heart. They were intimate, filled with inside jokes, references to their time together, their shared secrets. I felt sick reading them, the words blurring as tears filled my eyes. But as I scrolled further, I found something else, something that made my stomach twist with fear. There were messages that didn't make sense, ones that seemed different from the rest. They were more cryptic, filled with tension, fear even. Ryan was demanding something from Emily, and it was clear she was terrified. The more I read, the more I realized that this was no ordinary affair. It wasn't just about attraction or feeling alive. Ryan was using Emily, controlling her, and whatever hold he had on her went deeper than I could have imagined. The messages made my blood run cold. You know what I have on you, Emily. Don't forget it. If you don't do what I asked, everyone will know the truth. You owe me, and I won't let you forget it. You know what happens if you don't pay up. Emily's replies were frantic, filled with desperation. Please, Ryan. I've done everything you asked. Just leave me alone. I'm begging you. I can't keep doing this. I just want my life back. I felt a chill run down my spine as I read her words, the fear palpable. This wasn't just an affair, this was blackmail. Ryan had something on Emily, something that terrified her, and he was using it to control her. I didn't know what it was, but I knew I had to find out. I couldn't just stand by while my wife was being manipulated. Even if she had betrayed me, there was more at play here, something darker than I had ever imagined. I confronted Emily the next morning. I couldn't wait any longer. I needed to know the truth. I walked into the kitchen, where she was making breakfast for the kids, her face pale, her eyes filled with exhaustion. She looked up at me, her expression filled with uncertainty, and I could see the fear in her eyes. Emily, I said, my voice trembling. We need to talk. She looked at me, her hands stilling as she set down the spatula. Mark, she whispered, her voice shaky. I don't know if I can do this right now. I shook my head, my heart pounding. No. You're going to tell me everything? I said, my voice firmer than I had intended. I read your messages, Emily. I know about Ryan. I know he's blackmailing you. Her face went white, her eyes widening in shock. You read my messages? She stammered, her voice cracking. I nodded, the anger and fear bubbling inside me. Yes, I did. And I need to know what's going on. What does he have on you, Emily? What is he threatening you with? She looked down, her tears spilling over as she covered her face with her hands. I never wanted you to find out, she whispered, her voice trembling. I was trying to protect you, to protect our family. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. Protect us from what? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. What did you do, Emily? She looked up at me, her eyes filled with tears, her face twisted with pain. It started when I met him, she said, her voice cracking. I thought it was just a fling, something meaningless. But then he started asking for money. He said he knew things about me, things that could ruin us, and that if I didn't pay him, he'd make sure everyone knew. I stared at her, the weight of her words pressing down on me. What kind of things? I asked, my voice trembling. She shook her head, her tears falling faster now. It wasn't just the affair, she whispered, her voice filled with shame. He got me involved in something illegal. I didn't mean for it to happen, Mark. I was desperate, and he promised me it would be fine. But then it got out of hand, and now he's using it to control me. My stomach turned, the fear and disbelief overwhelming. Illegal? I asked, my voice barely audible. What do you mean? Emily took a deep breath, her shoulders slumping as she looked away. He had me help him launder money, she whispered. He said it was just a small favor, that no one would ever find out. But now he has proof, and he's using it to make me do whatever he wants. If I don't, he'll go to the police. He'll ruin everything. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me, the reality of what she was saying crashing down on me. This wasn't just an affair. This was something far worse. My wife, the woman I had trusted more than anyone, had gotten herself involved in something criminal, and now she was being blackmailed. I didn't know what to say, didn't know how to process everything she had just told me. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, my voice cracking. Why didn't you come to me for help? She looked up at me, her tears spilling over, her face filled with regret. I was scared, she whispered. I was scared of what you'd think of me, of losing you, of losing our family. I thought I could fix it on my own, but I just kept making things worse. I'm so sorry, Mark. I never meant for any of this to happen. I stood there, my heart breaking, the woman I had loved more than anything in the world standing in front of me, telling me that she had betrayed me in ways I couldn't even begin to comprehend. I wanted to be angry, wanted to hate her for what she had done, but all I felt was sadness. Sadness for what we had lost, for the life we had once shared, for the love that had been shattered. I don't know what to do, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't know how to fix this, Emily. She looked at me, her eyes filled with desperation. I need your help, Mark, she whispered. I can't do this alone. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm begging you. Please help me. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. I took a deep breath, my heart heavy. I didn't know if I could forgive her, didn't know if I could ever trust her again. But I also knew that I couldn't just walk away, not when she was in danger, not when our family was at risk. I loved her, despite everything, and I couldn't just leave her to face this alone. Okay, I said finally, my voice trembling. I'll help you, but this isn't about us. This is about our kids, about keeping them safe. We'll deal with everything else later. Emily nodded, her tears spilling over, her face filled with gratitude. Thank you, she whispered, her voice cracking. I promise I'll do whatever it takes. I'll make this right. We stood there, the weight of everything pressing down on us, the reality of what we were facing sinking in. It wasn't a solution, and it wasn't a promise that everything would be okay. But it was a start. A step toward trying to fix the mess we were in, to protect our family from the darkness that had taken hold of our lives. As I looked at Emily, her face filled with fear and regret, I realized that this was only the beginning. There were still so many questions, so many things I didn't understand. But I knew one thing for certain. We were in this together, and I wasn't going to let her face it alone. The days that followed Emily's confession were some of the hardest of my life. The realization of how deep her involvement with Ryan went made everything feel surreal, like I was living in someone else's nightmare. I had no idea where to begin, how to untangle the mess that Emily had gotten herself into. The knowledge that my wife had been laundering money, that she had been manipulated and used by this man, weighed heavily on my shoulders. But more than anything, I was scared for our family. I needed to protect them. Emily and I sat down one night after the kids had gone to bed, our living room filled with a heavy silence. I looked at her, my heart aching as I saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the regret that seemed to hang over her like a dark cloud. "We need to figure out a plan," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "We can't just let Ryan keep controlling you. We have to do something." She nodded, her eyes filled with fear. "I know," she said, her voice trembling. "But I don't know what to do, Mark. He has proof, documents, transactions, everything. If we go to the police, he'll ruin us. And if I don't do what he wants, I'm terrified of what he might do." I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I knew that we couldn't go to the police, at least not yet. Not until we had something to protect ourselves. Something that could prove that Emily was coerced, that she had been manipulated. We needed leverage, something that could put Ryan on the defensive, something that could turn the tables. "Does he ever meet with you in person?" I asked, an idea starting to form in my mind. She hesitated, then nodded. "Sometimes," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He usually just texts or calls, but sometimes he insists on meeting." "Why?" I looked at her, my heart pounding. "We need to get something on him. If we can record him, get him to admit that he's blackmailing you, we might have a chance. We could take it to the police, use it as leverage." Her eyes widened, fear flashing across her face. "Mark, I don't know," she said, her voice shaking. "What if he finds out? What if it makes things worse?" I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "I know it's risky," I said softly, "but we can't just keep living like this. We have to take control, Emily. We have to fight back." She looked down, her tears spilling over. "Okay," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I'll do it. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." The next few days were a blur of anxiety and planning. Emily reached out to Ryan, arranging a meeting under the pretense of needing to discuss their business. He agreed, setting a time and place, a secluded spot at a park on the outskirts of town. I could see the fear in Emily's eyes as the day of the meeting approached, the way her hands shook whenever she picked up her phone. I tried to reassure her, tried to be there for her, but I knew that there was only so much I could do. She was terrified, and so was I. The day of the meeting, I wired Emily with a small recording device, my hands trembling as I clipped it to the inside of her jacket. She looked at me, her eyes filled with fear, her face pale. "What if this doesn't work?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "What if he catches me?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "It will work," I said, my voice filled with more confidence than I felt. "Just stay calm. Get him talking, and we'll have what we need." She nodded, her tears spilling over, and she leaned in, pressing her forehead against mine. "I love you, Mark," she whispered, her voice trembling. "And I'm so sorry for everything. I never wanted to hurt you." I swallowed hard, my heart aching. "I know," I whispered. "I love you too. We're going to get through this. We have to." I watched as she drove away, my heart pounding, fear gnawing at me. I hated that she had to face this alone, that I couldn't be there with her. But I knew that if we wanted any chance of getting out of this mess, this was the only way. I parked a few blocks away from the park, close enough to hear the recording through the receiver I had set up, but far enough to stay out of sight. My hands were shaking as I adjusted the volume, my breath catching in my throat as I heard the sound of Emily's car door closing. She was there. Minutes passed like hours, the tension making it hard to breathe. I listened as Emily's footsteps crunched on the gravel path, her breathing shaky. And then I heard another voice, a voice that made my blood run cold. "Emily," Ryan said, his tone casual, almost amused. "I'm glad you came. I was starting to think you were going to try to back out on me." Emily's voice was shaky, but she kept her composure. "I just wanted to talk," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need to know what you're planning. I can't keep doing this, Ryan. You need to let me go." He laughed, the sound cold and cruel. "Let you go?" he repeated, his tone mocking. "Emily, you don't get to decide when this ends. You're in this until I say you're not. You owe me. Remember." My hands clenched into fists, anger boiling inside me as I listened to him. The way he spoke to her, the way he treated her like she was nothing, made my blood boil. I wanted to storm over there, to make him pay for everything he had done. But I forced myself to stay put, to listen, to wait. "Please, Ryan," Emily said, her voice trembling. "I've done everything you asked. I just want my life back. I want my family back." There was a pause, and then Ryan's voice turned cold, his tone dripping with malice. "You think you can just walk away from this?" he said, his voice low. "I have everything, Emily. The documents, the transactions, all of it. If you try to back out, I'll make sure the police get every single piece of evidence. And trust me, they'll come after you first." I felt my stomach turn, the fear overwhelming. This was it. This was what we needed, proof that he was blackmailing her, that he was the one pulling the strings. I just needed him to say a little more, to incriminate himself even further. "Why are you doing this?" Emily asked, her voice filled with desperation. "Why can't you just leave me alone?" Ryan laughed again, the sound sending a chill down my spine. "Because you're useful, Emily," he said, his voice cold. "And as long as you're useful, I'm not letting you go. So unless you want your entire life to fall apart, you'll keep doing what I tell you." That was it. That was all we needed. I heard Emily's breathing quicken, the fear evident in her voice as she tried to end the conversation. "Okay," she whispered. "I understand. I'll do what you want." Ryan seemed satisfied, his tone softening slightly. "Good," he said. "See? That wasn't so hard, was it?" Emily didn't respond, and I heard her footsteps as she turned and walked away, the sound of her breathing shaky, her fear palpable. I waited, my heart pounding, until I heard her car door close, the engine starting. She was safe. She had done it. I drove home, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, the adrenaline still coursing through my veins. When I got there, Emily was already inside, sitting on the couch, her face buried in her hands. I walked over to her, my heart aching as I saw the tears streaming down her face. "It's over," I said softly, my voice trembling. "We have what we need. We can go to the police." She looked up at me, her eyes wide with fear and hope. "Are you sure?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "What if he finds out? What if he tries to hurt us?" I took a deep breath, reaching for her hand. "We're not going to let him control us anymore," I said, my voice filled with determination. "We're going to fight back. Together." She nodded, her tears spilling over, and she leaned in, resting her head on my shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for not giving up on me." I held her close, my heart aching with a mix of love and fear. This was only the beginning. There was still so much to do, so many risks ahead. But for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a glimmer of hope. We were in this together, and we were going to fight no matter what it took. The following day, Emily and I sat together in the kitchen, the recording device between us on the table. It felt surreal, knowing that everything we needed to end this nightmare was right there. I had spent most of the night listening to the recording over and over, making sure that Ryan had incriminated himself enough for the police to act. And he had. His arrogance, his threats, it was all there, and it was enough. I looked at Emily, her eyes red from crying, her face pale. She looked exhausted, and I knew that the fear of what we were about to do was weighing heavily on her. I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "This is our chance, Em," I said softly. "We can end this. We can get our lives back." She nodded, her tears spilling over. "I know," she whispered. I'm scared, Mark. What if it doesn't work? What if he finds a way to get to us before the police can help?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "I won't let that happen," I said, my voice filled with determination. "We're going to do this right. We're going to protect ourselves and the kids. I promise you." We made a plan. I would go to the police station alone, while Emily stayed home with the kids. We agreed it was better that way, safer. She was still too afraid of Ryan, too scared that he might somehow know what we were up to. I understood her fear. I felt it too, but I also knew that we had to do this. We couldn't keep living in fear, couldn't let Ryan control our lives any longer. I drove to the police station, my heart pounding in my chest, the recording in my pocket feeling like a heavy weight. I walked inside, the bright lights of the station making me feel exposed, vulnerable. I asked to speak to someone about a blackmail situation, and after a few minutes, I was led to a small room where a detective introduced himself as Detective Harris. He was an older man, his face lined with years of experience, his eyes kind but serious. He listened as I explained the situation, his expression growing more concerned with each word. I handed him the recording, my hands trembling as I did. He took it, nodding slowly. "We're going to take this very seriously," he said, his voice calm but firm. "From what you've told me, this man is dangerous, and we need to make sure you and your family are protected. We'll analyze the recording and move forward with an investigation. But I need you to understand that this might take some time. We need to make sure we have all the evidence we need before we act." I nodded, my heart sinking slightly. "How long?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "How long until we're safe?" He looked at me, his expression filled with understanding. "I wish I could give you a definitive answer," he said softly. "But I promise you, we'll do everything we can to keep you and your family safe. In the meantime, I want you to stay vigilant. If you see anything suspicious, if you feel like you're in danger, call us immediately." I left the police station with a mix of emotions. Fear, uncertainty, but also a glimmer of hope. I had done what I could, taken the first step toward ending this nightmare. Now, all I could do was wait and hope that the police would be able to act before Ryan made his next move. When I got home, Emily was waiting for me, her face filled with anxiety. I walked over to her, wrapping my arms around her, holding her close. "It's done," I said softly, my voice trembling. "They're going to investigate. They said it might take some time, but they promised they'd protect us." She looked up at me, her eyes wide with fear. "What do we do now?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "Do we just wait?" I nodded, my heart heavy. "Yeah," I said. "We wait, but we stay vigilant. We're not going to let him catch us off guard." The next few days were filled with tension, the fear of what might happen hanging over us like a storm cloud. Emily and I tried to keep things as normal as possible for the kids, but it was hard. Every time the phone rang, every time a car drove past the house, I felt my heart leap into my throat, the fear that it might be Ryan coming to confront us. I knew that Emily felt the same way. I could see it in the way she flinched at sudden noises, the way her eyes constantly darted to the windows, as if expecting him to be there watching. One evening, as we were putting the kids to bed, I could see the exhaustion in Emily's eyes, the way her hands trembled as she tucked our daughter in. After the kids were asleep, we sat down in the living room, the silence between us thick with unspoken fears. I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "We're going to get through this," I said softly, my voice trembling. "I know it's hard, but we have to stay strong. For the kids, for each other." She looked at me, her eyes filling with tears. "I'm so sorry, Mark," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I hate that I brought this into our lives. I hate that I put us in danger. If anything happens to you or the kids because of me." I shook my head, my heart aching. "This isn't your fault," I said firmly. "You made a mistake, but you didn't choose this. He manipulated you, controlled you, and now we're gonna fight back. Together." She nodded, her tears spilling over, and she leaned in, resting her head on my shoulder. I held her close, my heart filled with a mix of love and fear. I didn't know what was going to happen, didn't know if we were truly safe, but I knew that I loved her, and I knew that I would do whatever it took to protect our family. Then, one night, everything changed again. It was late, and I was in the living room, trying to unwind after another stressful day. Emily had gone to bed, and the kids were asleep. I was just about to turn off the TV when I heard a noise. Something outside. Something that made my heart stop. I stood up, my body tensing, my eyes darting to the window. I could see a shadow moving in the yard, a figure slowly making its way toward the house. My heart pounded in my chest, fear gripping me as I realized who it had to be. Ryan. I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking as I dialed 911, my eyes never leaving the window. I could see him now, his face partially obscured by the darkness, his movements slow and deliberate as he approached the front door. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's voice crackled in my ear. There's someone outside my house, I whispered, my voice trembling. He's dangerous. Please, send help. I gave them my address, my heart pounding as I heard a knock at the front door. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I needed to stay calm, needed to protect my family. I crept to the bottom of the stairs, my eyes on the front door, my heart pounding. Emily appeared at the top of the stairs, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. "Mark," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What's going on?" "It's him," I said, my voice trembling. "Stay upstairs with the kids. The police are on their way." She nodded, her tears spilling over as she turned and disappeared into the kids' room, the door closing softly behind her. I stood there, my body tense, my heart pounding, the knocking at the door growing louder. "Mark," Ryan's voice called out, his tone mocking, filled with arrogance. "I know you're in there. Open the door. Let's talk." I took a deep breath, my hands clenched into fists. I wasn't gonna let him in, wasn't gonna let him hurt my family. I just needed to hold out until the police arrived. The knocking grew louder, more insistent, and I felt the fear rise in my chest. I didn't know what he was capable of, didn't know what he might do, but I knew one thing for certain: I wasn't going to let him win. Ryan's pounding on the door echoed through the house, each knock like a thunderclap against my chest. I stood there, frozen, trying to think, trying to plan my next move. My heart raced, my hands trembling as I clutched my phone, the operator's voice still on the other end. "Sir, stay on the line. Officers are en route to your location," the operator said, her voice calm but urgent. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "Please hurry," I whispered, my eyes never leaving the door. I could see the handle shaking now, Ryan trying to force his way in. "Mark!" he shouted again, his voice filled with menace. "You really think you can get away with this? You think you can hide from me?" I glanced back at the stairs, making sure Emily and the kids were still out of sight. I couldn't let them see this, couldn't let them be a part of this. My only thought was to protect them, to keep them safe. Suddenly, the knocking stopped. I held my breath, my eyes wide, straining to hear any sound. Was he giving up? Was he leaving? I took a cautious step toward the window, trying to get a better view of the front yard without being seen. But before I could even look, the sound of shattering glass filled the room, and I ducked instinctively, my heart leaping into my throat. The living room window had shattered, the pieces scattering across the floor, and Ryan was halfway through, his eyes wild, a twisted smile on his face. "I warned you, didn't I?" he said, his voice low and taunting. "I warned you not to cross me." Panic set in, and I scrambled to my feet, my eyes darting around the room. I needed something, anything, to defend myself. My eyes landed on the fireplace poker resting by the hearth, and without thinking, I grabbed it, holding it out in front of me. "Get out of my house," I said, my voice shaking. The police are on their way. You need to leave. Now. Ryan's eyes narrowed, and he let out a low, mocking laugh. The police? You think they scare me? He said, stepping closer, his hands raised in mock surrender. You're in over your head, Mark. You have no idea what you're dealing with. I took a step back, my heart pounding. I could hear the sound of sirens in the distance, getting closer, but they weren't here yet. I just needed to buy a little more time, needed to keep him from getting upstairs to Emily and the kids. Ryan, just leave, I said, my voice trembling. It doesn't have to end like this. He shook his head, his expression turning cold. You should have just stayed out of it, he said, his voice filled with anger. Emily was mine. You had no right to interfere. The sound of his words sent a chill down my spine, and I tightened my grip on the poker, my hands trembling. She's my wife, I said, my voice cracking. She was never yours. You manipulated her, blackmailed her, and now it's over. The police are coming, and they're going to take you away. For a moment, Ryan's face twisted with rage, his eyes narrowing, and he lunged toward me, his hands outstretched. Without thinking, I swung the poker, the metal making contact with his arm, and he stumbled back, cursing under his breath. You're going to regret that, he hissed, his eyes filled with fury. I could hear the sirens getting closer now, and I knew I just needed to hold on a little longer. Ryan looked toward the window, then back at me, his expression filled with rage and frustration. He took a step back, his eyes never leaving mine. This isn't over, Mark, he said, his voice low and menacing. You think you can win, but you have no idea what I'm capable of. Before I could respond, I heard the sound of car doors slamming outside, and Ryan turned, his eyes widening in surprise. He bolted for the window, climbing out just as the red and blue lights of the police cars illuminated the front yard. I ran to the window, watching as he disappeared into the darkness, the officers shouting at him to stop. I dropped the poker, my hands shaking, my heart pounding in my chest. The front door burst open, and 2 officers rushed in, their guns drawn, their eyes scanning the room. Sir, are you okay? One of them asked, his voice urgent. I nodded, my breath coming in short gasps. He went out the window, I said, pointing toward the shattered glass. He's running. Please, you have to catch him. The officers nodded, one of them speaking into his radio, calling for backup. I watched as they ran back outside, their flashlights cutting through the darkness as they searched for Ryan. I sank down onto the couch, my body trembling, the adrenaline slowly wearing off, leaving me exhausted. A moment later, Emily came rushing down the stairs, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. She ran over to me, her arms wrapping around me, her body trembling. Mark, she whispered, her voice breaking. Are you okay? What happened? I held her close, my heart aching as I felt her tears soaking into my shirt. He tried to break in, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. But the police are here now. They're going to find him. We're going to be okay. She pulled back, her eyes searching mine, her face filled with fear. I'm so sorry, she whispered, her voice cracking. This is all my fault. I should have never gotten involved with him. I should have never. I shook my head, my heart breaking as I saw the pain in her eyes. This isn't your fault, I said softly, my voice trembling. He manipulated you, controlled you. We're going to get through this. Together. She nodded, her tears spilling over, and she leaned in, resting her forehead against mine. I love you, Mark, she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. And I'm so sorry for everything. I love you too, I said, my voice cracking. And we're going to be okay. We just have to stay strong. The officers returned a few minutes later, their faces grim. He got away, one of them said, his voice filled with regret. But we're putting out an APB. We'll find him. In the meantime, we're going to have a patrol car stationed outside your house, just in case. I nodded, my heart sinking. The thought of Ryan still out there, still a threat, made my stomach turn. But I knew that we had taken the first step toward ending this. We had gone to the police and now they were involved. We weren't alone anymore. After the officers left, Emily and I sat together on the couch, the house eerily quiet, the weight of everything pressing down on us. I could see the fear in her eyes, the way her hands still trembled, and I knew that this wasn't over. Ryan was still out there, still a threat, and we had no idea what he might do next. But as I looked at Emily, her face filled with regret, her eyes filled with love, I knew one thing for certain. We were in this together. No matter what happened, no matter how hard it got, I wasn't going to let her face this alone. We were going to fight and we were going to win. Because that's what you do when you love someone. You fight for them no matter what. The days that followed the break-in were a blur of fear, exhaustion, and uncertainty. The police kept their promise, stationing a patrol car outside our house, and I tried to take some comfort in the sight of it. But the fear never truly went away. Every noise, every unexpected knock at the door sent my heart racing. The kids were oblivious to what had happened, and we did our best to keep it that way. They were too young to understand the darkness that had suddenly taken over our lives, and I wanted to keep it that way for as long as I could. Emily and I stayed vigilant, constantly checking the locks, keeping the blinds closed, staying inside as much as possible. The police were doing everything they could to find Ryan, but he seemed to have vanished without a trace. The uncertainty of it all, the waiting, the wondering when he might strike again, was the worst part. It felt like we were living with a ticking time bomb, and we had no idea when or if it would go off. One night, after another long, stressful day, Emily and I sat in the living room, the silence between us thick with tension. She looked over at me, her eyes filled with exhaustion, her face pale. "Mark," she said softly, her voice trembling, "I don't know how much longer I can do this. I feel like I'm falling apart." I looked at her, my heart aching. I could see how much this was taking a toll on her. The constant fear, the guilt that she carried with her every day. She had lost weight, her eyes always red and puffy from crying, her hands always trembling. She was barely holding on, and I knew that if something didn't change soon, we were both going to break. "I know," I said softly, my voice cracking. "I feel the same way, but we have to stay strong, Em. We have to keep going. For the kids. For each other." She nodded, her tears spilling over, her face twisted with pain. "But how much longer, Mark?" she whispered. "How much longer do we have to live like this?" I didn't have an answer. I wished I could tell her that it would all be over soon, that we would be safe, that Ryan would be caught and locked away. But I couldn't. The truth was I didn't know, and that uncertainty was slowly killing us. Then, one afternoon, we got a call from Detective Harris. He had news, something that made my blood run cold. They had managed to track down one of Ryan's associates, someone who had been involved in the money laundering. The man had been arrested, and during questioning, he had given the police some disturbing information. Ryan was planning something big. Harris didn't have all the details, but he made it clear that Ryan wasn't done with us. He was angry, desperate, and he wanted revenge. The police were doing everything they could to track him down, but they were urging us to be cautious, to consider leaving town for a while if possible. The thought of running, of leaving our home, our lives was terrifying, but the thought of staying, of risking our safety was even worse. That night, Emily and I sat down, the weight of Harris's words pressing down on us. I could see the fear in her eyes, the way her hands shook as she held her cup of tea. "We need to go," I said finally, my voice trembling. "We can't stay here, not with Ryan out there. It's not safe." She looked at me, her eyes filling with tears. "But where would we go?" she whispered. "This is our home, Mark. The kids have school and we have jobs. How can we just leave?" I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "We'll figure it out," I said softly. "We'll go somewhere safe, just for a while, until the police catch him. I'd rather lose our home than lose you or the kids. You're what matters to me, Emily. Nothing else." She nodded, her tears spilling over, and she leaned in, resting her head on my shoulder. "I love you," she whispered, her voice cracking, "and I'm so sorry for everything." I love you too, I said, my voice trembling. We're going to get through this. Together. We decided to leave the next morning. We packed what we could, clothes, important documents, the kids' favorite toys, and loaded everything into the car. We didn't tell the kids much, just that we were going on a little trip, that it would be like an adventure. They seemed excited, unaware of the fear and tension that hung between Emily and me. We drove to a small cabin a few hours away, a place that my cousin owned. It was secluded, off the beaten path, and I hoped that it would be safe, that it would be a place where Ryan couldn't find us. The drive was quiet, the kids asleep in the back seat, and I could feel the tension radiating off Emily as she stared out the window, her face pale, her hands clenched in her lap. When we arrived at the cabin, it was already dark. The air was cool, the sound of crickets filling the night as we unloaded the car, carrying everything inside. The cabin was small, but it was cozy and it felt like a refuge, at least for now. We put the kids to bed, their laughter and excitement over the adventure, bringing a small smile to my face, even if just for a moment. Once the kids were asleep, Emily and I sat down in the small living room, the silence between us heavy. I could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the fear that seemed to cling to her like a shadow. "Do you think we're safe here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "I don't know," I said honestly, "but it's better than being at home, waiting for him to come back. At least here we're out of sight. We have a chance." She nodded, her tears spilling over, and she looked down at her hands. "I hate this," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I hate that we're running, that we're hiding. I just want our life back, Mark. I want us to be okay again." I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "I know," I said softly, "and we will be. We just have to get through this. We have to stay strong." The next few days at the cabin were tense. We stayed inside for the most part, keeping the blinds closed, trying to keep the kids entertained. We took turns keeping watch, both of us too afraid to let our guard down for even a moment. The police checked in with us regularly, but there was still no news on Ryan's whereabouts, no sign that they were any closer to catching him. One afternoon, as the kids were playing in the other room, Emily and I sat down to talk. We needed to figure out what to do next, whether we should stay at the cabin or try to move somewhere else. We were running out of food, and the isolation was starting to take its toll on both of us. "Maybe we should go back home," Emily said, her voice trembling. "I know it's risky, but the police are there. Maybe it's safer than we think." I shook my head, my heart pounding at the thought. "It's too dangerous," I said firmly. "We can't risk it. Not until we know he's been caught." She nodded, her tears welling up, and she looked down at her hands. "I just want this to be over," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I can't keep living like this, Mark. I'm scared all the time. I'm scared for you, for the kids, and it's all my fault." I reached for her, pulling her into my arms, holding her close. "This isn't your fault," I said softly, my voice trembling. "Ryan did this. He manipulated you, controlled you, and now we're going to fight back. We're not going to let him win." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with fear and determination. "What if he finds us?" she whispered. "What if he comes here?" I swallowed hard, my heart pounding. "If he comes here, we'll be ready," I said, my voice filled with determination. "We're not going to let him take anything else from us." That night, as we lay in bed, the kids asleep in the room next door, I felt a sense of resolve settle over me. I was tired of running, tired of hiding. I wanted my life back, wanted my family back, and I was willing to do whatever it took to make that happen. The next day, I called Detective Harris, my hands trembling as I dialed the number. When he answered, I took a deep breath, my heart pounding. "Detective, I need to talk to you," I said, my voice shaky. "We can't keep running. We need to end this. And I think I have an idea." Harris listened as I laid out my plan, a desperate gamble, but one that might just work. It was risky, and it would require Emily and me to put ourselves in danger. But it was our only chance. Harris was hesitant, urging me to be cautious, but in the end, he agreed. They would help us. They would set the trap. Emily was terrified when I told her what I had planned. She cried, begged me not to do it. But I knew that this was the only way. We couldn't keep hiding, couldn't keep living in fear. We had to take control, had to end this nightmare once and for all. As we sat together in the cabin, the plan set in motion, I looked at her, my heart aching. We're going to get through this, I said softly, my voice trembling. And when it's over, we're going to get our life back. I promise. She nodded, her tears spilling over, and she leaned in, resting her forehead against mine. I love you, Mark, she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. And I'm so scared. I love you too, I said, my voice cracking. And I'm scared too. But we're in this together. And we're going to win. The trap was set, and now all we could do was wait. It was a desperate gamble, but it was our only chance. And I was willing to risk everything to protect my family. The day of the plan, tension hung over us like a storm cloud. I could see the fear in Emily's eyes as we prepared, the weight of what we were about to do pressing down on both of us. We had been running for too long, living in fear of Ryan's next move, and now it was time to end it. But that didn't make the reality of what we were about to do any less terrifying. The plan was simple in theory but dangerous in execution. We were going to lure Ryan out, make him think that we were giving in, that we were ready to comply with whatever demands he had. We would be returning to our home, making it look as though we were vulnerable, that we had given up. It was a trap, one that the police were helping us set, but there were no guarantees. Ryan was dangerous, unpredictable, and we had no idea what he might do when he showed up. The police had set up surveillance around our house, officers in unmarked cars, ready to move the moment Ryan arrived. Detective Harris had assured us that they would keep us safe, that they wouldn't let anything happen to us. But I knew that no plan was foolproof, and the thought of putting Emily and our children in harm's way made my stomach twist in knots. The drive back to our home was silent. The kids, thankfully, were with my parents, away from everything that was about to happen. Emily and I had decided it was better that way. We couldn't risk them being caught in the middle of whatever might go down. I reached over, taking Emily's hand in mine, squeezing it gently. We're going to be okay, I said softly, my voice trembling. The police are ready. They're not going to let anything happen to us. She nodded, her tears spilling over, her hand squeezing mine. I'm just scared, Mark, she whispered, her voice cracking. I don't know what he's going to do. What if something goes wrong? I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. We have to trust them, I said, my voice filled with determination. We have to trust that they know what they're doing, and we have to trust each other. We're in this together, and we're going to get through it. When we arrived at the house, it felt strange, like we were stepping back into a place that was both familiar and foreign at the same time. Everything was just as we had left it, but the air felt different, charged with tension and fear. We walked inside, closing the door behind us, and I couldn't help but glance at the shattered window, now boarded up, a reminder of Ryan's last intrusion into our lives. Emily and I settled in the living room, the weight of what was about to happen pressing down on us. The police had given us specific instructions. Stay in the house, keep our phones on us at all times, and be ready to follow their lead. They were watching, waiting for Ryan to show up, but the waiting was the hardest part. Every creak, every noise from outside made my heart leap into my throat, my hands trembling as I tried to keep myself calm. Hours passed, the sun slowly setting, the shadows growing longer as night fell. Emily sat beside me on the couch, her eyes darting to the window every few minutes, her body tense. I could feel the fear radiating off her, the uncertainty of what we were doing eating away at both of us. Then, just as the last light of day disappeared, there was a knock at the door. Emily gasped, her eyes wide with fear, her hand flying to her mouth. I looked at her, my heart pounding, and I nodded slowly, trying to reassure her. This is it, I whispered. Stay calm. We're going to be okay. I stood up, my legs shaking as I walked to the door, my hand hovering over the doorknob. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I knew the police were out there, knew they were watching, waiting for the right moment. I had to trust them, had to believe that they would protect us. I opened the door, and there he was, Ryan, his face twisted with anger, his eyes filled with hatred. He didn't waste any time, shoving the door open wider, forcing his way inside. I stumbled back, my heart pounding, fear gripping me as he stepped into the living room, his gaze locking onto Emily. "Well, well, well," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "Look who decided to come home. I knew you couldn't run forever, Emily. You really thought you could get away from me?" Emily stood up, her body trembling, her eyes filled with tears. "Please, Ryan," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Just leave us alone. We don't want any trouble." Ryan laughed, the sound cold and cruel. "Oh, it's a little late for that, don't you think?" he said, taking a step toward her. "You made your choice, Emily, and now you're going to have to live with the consequences." I could see Emily's fear, the way her hands shook as she tried to hold her ground. I wanted to protect her, wanted to put myself between her and Ryan, but I knew that I had to wait, had to trust that the police were watching, that they would step in before things got out of control. Ryan turned his gaze to me, his eyes narrowing. "And you, Mark," he said, his voice filled with disdain. "You really thought you could beat me? You have no idea who you're dealing with. I always win." I clenched my jaw, my hands trembling at my sides. "This ends tonight, Ryan," I said, my voice filled with as much strength as I could muster. "You're not going to hurt us anymore. It's over." Ryan's face twisted with rage, and he lunged toward me, his hands outstretched. In that moment, everything seemed to slow down. The fear, the adrenaline, the sound of Emily's scream as she watched him move toward me. I braced myself, my body tensing, but before Ryan could reach me, the front door burst open, the sound of shouting filling the room. "Police! Get down!" Detective Harris's voice boomed, and in an instant, the room was filled with officers, their guns drawn, their voices commanding. Ryan froze, his eyes wide with shock, his hands still outstretched. The officers moved quickly, grabbing him, forcing him to the ground, their voices shouting commands as they handcuffed him. Emily rushed over to me, her arms wrapping around me, her body trembling as she sobbed into my chest. "It's over," I whispered, my voice cracking. "It's finally over." Detective Harris walked over, his face serious, but there was a hint of relief in his eyes. "We've got him," he said, his voice calm. "You're safe now." I nodded, my heart still pounding, the reality of what had just happened slowly sinking in. Ryan was being led out of the house, his face twisted with anger, his eyes locking onto mine one last time. "This isn't over, Mark," he spat, his voice filled with venom. "You'll regret this." I held Emily close, my heart aching as I watched him being taken away. I knew that this was only the beginning of a long road ahead. There would be trials, questions, and a lot of healing that needed to happen. But for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a sense of hope. Ryan was gone and we were safe. Detective Harris stayed with us for a while, making sure we were okay, going over the next steps. The officers outside slowly dispersed, and eventually, it was just Emily and me, standing in the living room, the weight of everything pressing down on us. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with tears, her face pale. "I can't believe it's really over," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I've been so scared, Mark. I thought we'd never get away from him." I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "We did it," I said softly, my voice cracking. "We're safe now. We're going to be okay." She nodded, her tears spilling over, and she leaned in, resting her head on my shoulder. "I love you," she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. "And I'm so sorry for everything I put you through." I closed my eyes, the tears welling up. "I love you too," I said, my voice barely audible. "And we're going to get through this, together." As we stood there, holding each other, the silence of the house enveloping us, I realized that this was the first step toward healing. There was still so much to face, so much to overcome, but we had made it through the worst of it. We had faced the darkness, and we had come out on the other side. And now, finally, it was time to start rebuilding, to find our way back to each other one step at a time. In the weeks that followed Ryan's arrest, life slowly started to regain some sense of normalcy. The kids came back home from my parents' place, and seeing their faces light up as they walked through the front door made my heart swell with hope. For them, it was like nothing had ever happened, just an extended vacation at Grandma and Grandpa's. They were too young to understand the danger that had threatened our family, and I was grateful for that. I wanted to keep them protected from the darkness that Emily and I had faced. Emily and I, however, knew that the road ahead was going to be a long one. There was still so much to heal, so much trust to rebuild. We had been through something unimaginable, and the scars were still fresh, the wounds not yet fully closed. But we were ready to begin that journey together. We had faced the worst, and we had come out stronger, more connected, more willing to fight for each other. One day, a few weeks after everything had ended, Emily suggested we go for a family outing. It was something we hadn't done in so long, just a simple day out, enjoying each other's company without the looming fear that had been hanging over us for months. We packed a picnic, loaded the kids into the car, and drove to a nearby park. The day was bright and sunny, the air filled with the scent of fresh grass and the sounds of laughter. It felt like a new beginning, a chance to create new memories, to leave behind the fear and the pain. As we sat together on a blanket, the kids chasing each other around, their laughter filling the air, I looked over at Emily. She was watching them, a soft smile on her face, her eyes filled with emotion. She looked at me, her smile widening, her eyes glistening with tears. "I've missed this," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've missed us." I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "I've missed this too," I said, my voice filled with emotion. "I've missed you." She took a deep breath, her tears spilling over, and she looked down at our hands, her fingers intertwined with mine. "I know I've said it 1,000 times, but I need you to know how sorry I am, Mark," she whispered. "I made so many mistakes, and I hurt you in ways I can never take back. But I promise I'm going to spend the rest of my life making it right. I love you, and I want us to be better than we ever were before." I looked at her, my heart aching with both love and pain. I could see the sincerity in her eyes, the remorse that she carried with her every day. And I realized that, despite everything we had been through, I still loved her more than anything. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, and there were still moments when the hurt resurfaced, when the fear and anger bubbled up. But I wanted to move forward. I wanted to rebuild what we had lost, to create something even stronger. "I love you too, Emily," I said softly, my voice cracking. "And I want to move forward with you. It's not going to be perfect, and there will still be hard days. But I'm willing to try. I'm willing to fight for us." She smiled, her tears spilling over, and she leaned in, resting her forehead against mine. "That's all I want," she whispered, her voice trembling. "A chance to be better, to build something beautiful together." As we sat there, holding each other, the warmth of the sun on our faces, the sound of our children laughing in the background, I realized that this was what love was. Choosing each other every day, even when it was hard, even when it hurt. It wasn't about perfection. It was about forgiveness, about growth, about being willing to face the challenges together. In the weeks that followed, Emily and I started going to couples counseling. It was something we both knew we needed. Someone to help us navigate the pain, the trust issues, the fears that still lingered. It wasn't easy, and there were times when the sessions brought up emotions we had tried to bury. But it was worth it. Slowly, we were starting to understand each other again, starting to rebuild the foundation that had been shattered. One evening, after a particularly difficult session, Emily and I sat on the porch, the sun setting in the distance, casting a warm, golden glow over the yard. She looked over at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and determination. "Do you think we'll ever be okay again?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I took a deep breath, my heart heavy but hopeful. "I think we're getting there," I said softly. "It's not going to be easy, and it's not going to happen overnight, but we're trying, and that's what matters." She smiled, her eyes glistening with tears, and she leaned in, resting her head on my shoulder. "I want us to be better than we were before," she whispered. "I want us to build something even stronger." I wrapped my arm around her, holding her close. "And we will," I said, my voice filled with determination. One day at a time. As the weeks turned into months, the fear that had once consumed our lives slowly began to fade. The police kept us updated on the progress of Ryan's case, and it gave us a sense of closure, knowing that he was no longer a threat. The constant fear, the uncertainty, it all began to lift, replaced by a sense of hope, a sense of possibility. Emily and I continued to work on our relationship, continued to make time for each other, to talk about our fears, our hopes, our dreams. We started to dream again about the future, about the life we wanted to build together. It felt like we were rediscovering each other, finding a deeper connection that came from having faced our darkest moments and choosing to fight for each other. One afternoon, as we were sitting in the backyard, watching the kids play, Emily turned to me, her eyes filled with love. "Do you think we'll ever forget what happened?" she asked, her voice soft. I shook my head, my heart aching. "I don't think we'll ever forget," I said honestly. "But maybe that's okay. Maybe it's a reminder of how far we've come, of what we've overcome together. It's part of our story now, but it doesn't define us." She smiled, her eyes glistening with tears, and she reached for my hand, squeezing it gently. "I love you, Mark," she whispered, "and I'm so grateful that you never gave up on me, on us." I looked at her, my heart swelling with love. "I love you too," I said, my voice cracking, "and I'm so proud of us. We've come a long way, and I know we still have a long way to go, but we're doing it, together." As we sat there, holding each other, watching our children laugh and play, I realized that love wasn't about never making mistakes. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about choosing each other, every day, even when it was hard, even when it hurt. It was about forgiveness, about growth, about being willing to face the challenges together. Emily and I had been broken, but we were also stronger now. We were more honest, more open, more willing to fight for the love we still shared. And as I held her close, I knew that whatever the future held, whatever challenges, whatever joys, whatever heartaches, we would face it together, with love, with hope, and with an unwavering commitment to each other. Because in the end, that's what mattered most. Choosing each other, every day, no matter what. Bye-bye.